"Come on, you'd crumble without me," she said, casual as a weather report, like the odds had already been calculated to 3 decimal places in her favor. "Really now?" The words walked out of the mouth before permission was granted, and somewhere behind the sternum, a silent countdown started. Acceptance clicked into the international post. Interim accommodation secured. Postal rerouting confirmed. When she arrived at the old flat with a monologue lacquered and ready, the knock met a different life. A current occupant with a keychain laugh and no script for this scene. The door closed. The speech evaporated into the hall. It's easy to pretend conquest is care when it first arrives as taste. The first month was a mushrooming of changes in the language of lifestyle. The rug knows the angle better this way. Natural light benefits from pale oak. Let's anchor the space with something sculptural. The couch wore new skin. The walls swallowed color. My life adjusted its spine to satisfy an aesthetic grammar I didn't speak, and because I was raised to be polite to fluency, I made room. I ignored that the first furniture moved was mine. The bench with the solder-scorched mat, the parts drawers labeled like a librarian's prayer, the test stand with its careful bruises. I ignored that she didn't ask me about any of it. She told the room what the room needed. She told me who I was becoming. I believed her. I'm 36, orbital systems engineer. I build things meant to leave the planet and still find their way home. My hands know heat and patience. My head measures futures in tolerances. I had a converted second bedroom that breathed like a second heart, an ecosystem of prototypes and possible patents, the scent of flux and quiet triumph. Natalie called it clutter with a smile dressed as mercy. "We're building a showcase home," she said, and repeated "we" until ownership lost its temperature. The lease had my name, the room started using ours. It felt like being blessed and gently erased at the same time. We replaced my food truck on Lammer with rooms where the waiters carry plates like verdicts. We replaced dawn hikes with night openings, polished shoes, paintings the size of debts, a performance of spontaneity hard as crystal. My boots became a problem. My khakis became an embarrassment. "You can't wear that, Trevor," she would say, tugging at a sleeve with a mix of affection and disappointment that trained the soul to anticipate disapproval. "You're a partner in perception," she'd add, a phrase so clean it removed tracks. And because love can be an excellent anesthetic, I let her rewire my closet and call it sophistication. The worst wasn't the spending, it was the shrinking. I started asking permission to be myself. Lunch with an old roommate became a consultation. Saturday with the bench became a negotiation. A blue shirt became a referendum. I checked my phone in the middle of decisions my spine used to make for me. My friends noticed first. "Dude," Marcus said, on one of those increasingly rare hikes where the mountains still loved us. "You used to argue quantum computing versus Monte Carlo methods for fun, and you still brought the sandwiches that didn't fall apart. Now you keep waiting for an alert to tell you the correct answer." I laughed it off and adjusted my gait to make the criticism less true. Denial is a great cobbler. Meanwhile, the lab became boxes. "Just for now," she promised, guiding a coil of wires into a storage bin, tape closing like a story shut before the twist. "We'll get a bigger place and you'll have a proper office. Are you hearing me? Proper." It was a word meant to soothe. It put a hand over the mouth of this present and promised a future upgrade that did not arrive. The prototype stopped visiting industry meetups. Colleagues asked, "What are you testing these days?" And I found myself apologizing to no one in particular. I told myself this is compromise. I told myself this is growth. I told myself give so you can get. But the getting never came. Then London, not a suggestion, an orbit change. 3-year satellite defense program, the letter said, neutral in its own glory. Lead a team of 12. The kind of role that untangles constraints you've lived with for a decade and ties new ones around a brighter star. I carried the letter home and found her with mood boards, squares of fabric like polite flags announcing someone else's country. "Nat," I started, electricity in the mouth. "You're not going to believe," a finger lifted. "Henderson's with Morrison Group, or will that ignite the old country club disaster?" she whispered to her screen. Then the laptop closed with the finality of edited narrative. The practiced girlfriend face appeared. "What's got you so animated? Did they approve your budget for toy parts?" She smiled to soften the sting. "It didn't. They offered me London," I said. "The position." The architecture of her expression shifted, surprise to calculation to conquest in 13 frames. "When do we leave?" she asked, already indexing climate-controlled transport for her vintage pieces, plotting the social circles like constellations to be owned. Not congratulations, not questions about the work, just immediate, studied logistics about how her orbit would wrap around mine and extract advantage from it. The feeling in my stomach wasn't disappointment, it was data. "I thought I might go alone initially," I said. "Set up, focus, get the lay of." She tilted her head like a museum patron trying to determine if the piece counts as art. "Alone," she repeated, a small sound fitted with all the adjectives for appalling. "Trevor, be serious. This is exactly when power couples ascend. London is layered, you'd be lost without me." The smirk slid in. "You'd crumble." The world didn't blur, it sharpened. The engineer heard a hypothesis. The test wrote itself. Move plans demand choreography, not chaos. Secure lines, tiered timelines, redundancies that make failure boring. I called the people whose job it is to make executives disappear into other cities without upsetting the furniture of gossip. I used the systems I built for discretion, encryption, as needed disclosure. Rehearsal of the cover story began the same day. "We'll scout neighborhoods." I texted her 3 links she would love in areas I would not inhabit. "We should plan shipping," I said, and sent her spreadsheets with climate standards for couture leather that I did not care about. I used my project voice. She mistook it for devotion. It was logistics. My exit had a window, a day she'd booked for a farewell spa serenade with friends whose names have the same sharpness their opinions do. While they surrendered to steam and someone with warm hands told them they were goddesses, unmarked trucks would get acquainted with my life. I didn't want a mess. I wanted clean lines. I wanted to leave nothing behind but the truth. Her things were not hostages. They were responsibility I placed in her name with 3 months paid, so no one could accuse me of punitive efficiency. Each garment inventoried. Each painting swaddled like a child. The Hermes Museum in a climate unit better than our closet. The car lease rerouted to a different address than mine. The gym quietly renewed. If it sounds like kindness, it was also armor. No loose ends, no leverage, no story where I looked like a wrecking ball. My things moved through the channels you only learn about when you're trusted. Anti-static cradle for my prototypes, shock sensors for the rig casings, secure documentation for the papers that have to travel like diplomats. The bench would be unpacked in a room that already had a window with a view of the Thames, morning light like a precise blessing. The second bedroom would not become a showroom this time. It would remain a lab, humming with permission. Departure morning. 9:47 a.m., text from the coordinator with the kind of calm you want surgeons to have. Ground team deployed, all systems operational. A crew that looked at my sensor array with admiration rather than irritation. "Your miniaturization work," the lead murmur said. "This is excellent." The sentence loosened something under the shoulder blade that had been clenched for so long it forgot its name. By 2:30 p.m., the last coil was secured. The apartment looked like a magazine spread that told no story about lived-in. I paced the rooms once more, hand trailing the air an inch from the walls. Grief did not attend. Nostalgia tried and was asked politely to keep moving. I left the keys on the kitchen island with a note to the incoming tenant. "The morning light is kinder than it looks at 7 a.m. Let it surprise you." Airport, a finite number of seconds to a gate. Old phone into a bin for devices whose memories needed to live in metal. New phone silent as a secret until the Atlantic deserved a confession. When the seatbelt light sighed off and the cabin settled into dark, I lit up a new life with 2 messages. For her, address, access codes, inventory link, costs covered, clean line. For the coordinator, phase 1 complete, initiating London ops. It read like victory because it was, but not the cartoon kind. It was the mature flavor of a decision that withstood scrutiny from every angle and still tasted right. London. The sky grayer than I remembered, the river a vein without shame, glass buildings huddled like ambitions. The temporary flat cradled an echo at first and then began to sing. The lab exhaled as soon as anti-static unfurled and the first box spat out its order. I hung the bench lamp and turned it on, even without a project under it, just to see what that light looked like in a new country. It looked like freedom pretending not to be sentimental. The office welcomed me with a badge that snapped as if it knew we'd work well together. 12 engineers, a swarm of accents and a shared current. Week 1, scope alignment. Week 2, test suite proposals and 3 arguments that ended with 2 handshakes and 1 joke. Week 3, first sim passes that kept things level when the world outside lacked sympathy. I opened my laptop and felt no one climb into my head to rearrange the furniture of my priorities. The work felt like a language without shame. My mouth remembered how to speak it in paragraphs. Silence cut off her oxygen supply. Her response wasn't a call, it was a campaign. Old number, 30-something missed calls that ricocheted into a void. The first wave of texts, emojis mixed with legal-sounding words she lifted from somewhere that has nicer furniture than understanding. The next wave, proxies, friends with subject lines like urgent, call me. A cousin from an angle I had barely known existed, her mother with the cadence of case law. We need your signature on a document regarding joint property. There was no joint property. Medical decisions. There was no medical situation. The tactic, flood the lines. Make reality sound urgent enough to tear through protocol. But protocol is a fortress for a reason. Important work means insulation from nonsense that could compromise focus. The corporate shield rose politely and impenetrably. All attempts rerouted to a department that collects drama and files it under no, thank you. If they had known how many creative ways other people would attempt to disrupt schedules and sanity, they invented new ways to say stop without raising their voice. Documented, time-stamped, patterns identified, formal letters carrying consequences in their coat pockets. Her mother tried again with better nouns. She met counsel with a voice as calm as a winter field and a memory like a ledger. The answer came wrapped in politeness, anchored in threat. Any legitimate concerns, please proceed via legitimate channels. Any fabrication or harassment, please note the statutes you are about to meet. The effect was not theatrical. It was calming like a hot pan set under cold water, steam, silence. Then the gold letterhead grenade, emotional damages, lifestyle support, joint innovation. It would have been funny if it hadn't been meant to scare. They tried to convert proximity into co-authorship, time spent near tools into a signature on design docs, living together into ownership of things she called toys. The ask, a number high enough to mislabel as inevitable. The threat, a lawsuit long enough to make most people settle for quiet. We did not belong to most people. Senior counsel wore years like armor and handled the letter with tongs. Aspirational litigation, she called it, folding the phrase like linen. Then she built the counter-document with a patience that looked like art. Career timeline, pre-relationship and thorough. IP logs that predate us. A paper trail of prototypes alive when I was still eating ramen at midnight and thinking this life was a rumor I might never get to verify. Screenshots of her calling my lab kid stuff when it got between her and a party. Slacks full of babe, do you have to go to the test thing? It's Ashley's birthday and the venue is everything. The arguments collapsed like bad scaffolding. The countersuit was not a threat so much as a mirror. Attempted extortion, documented harassment, interference with sensitive work responsibilities. The letter gave them 5 business days to choose a door. On day 3, they tried to soften tone. On day 5, retreat. No settlement. No apology. Just the sound of a billable hour clock trying to unring itself. Meanwhile, the rest of life kept happening, which is the most miraculous thing about a world that occasionally pretends to revolve around one person's drama. It does not. The project started generating data that wanted to be looked at twice. A simulation in week 6 where an error pattern disguised itself as noise and then, thanks to an intern who refused to accept patterns that almost look random, revealed a systematic drift at certain temperatures. We argued, we fixed, we ran it again. The line flattened in the way a person's pulse does when grief finally loosens its hands. I joined a weekend club tucked into a warehouse in East London on a street whose name feels like a cough. You'd miss the entrance if you didn't know that the graffiti meant go in. Inside, the hum of little beasts and the hush of people who feel reverence about circuitry. A man named Ollie with calloused hands and a serious smile introduced me to a micro course he'd built out of PVC and joy. The first time my prototype carved it clean, he let out a low whistle and said, "You made this with the kind of respect I wish more people had." That sentence cured a kind of loneliness I hadn't recognized as medical. Home grew edges that fit me. The second bedroom lab got messy in a way that means it's working. The living room held models hanging from the ceiling like captured constellations. The kitchen regained its dignity as a place where function matters more than performative charcuterie. I began to sleep without negotiating how guilty my dreams were allowed to be about the day's joys. Morning coffee tasted like coffee again instead of penance. I went on a date that did not exit as a love story. It was better than that. Proof that conversation can be an equal exchange of curiosity instead of performance. Her name was Leela. She worked on ground systems, had a low laugh, and liked the way the city smells after rain when buses are trying to pretend they're boats. We talked about error correction and stubbornness, and the specific ache of turning 30 and realizing that no one older than you is more in charge than they pretend. We didn't plan the next meeting. We left content. The air on the way home felt honest. We hit a design milestone in month 8 that made white-haired men in sturdy suits lean forward and ask me for a second pass on the demo. The guidance stack shrugged off conditions we expected it to respect. An allied group asked if we could share the algorithm's skeleton. Legal said, perhaps. Meetings multiplied. The project manager started using new vocabulary words like front page and external interest. I ate a celebratory donut at my desk and told no one about the sweetness because language gets sticky around humility. The apartment changed, subtle and significant. The lab door stayed open. The living room featured a small shrine to things I'd actually done, plaque-level successes next to taped-up failures that taught me better habits. The balcony kept its cacti alive, even though London tried to convince them to repent. The calendar added a standing Thursday dinner with 2 teammates who didn't apologize for laughing loudly. The Friday run moved to morning because I stopped believing sleep was a thing to be earned. There was a weekend walk where I passed 3 couples arguing within 20 minutes, each with different weather systems. Hushed urgency, performative volume, the chilling civility of a fight dressed as a conversation about plans. I felt a familiar old muscle tighten, the one that likes to solve other people's problems like you can do them a favor with brilliance. I kept walking. Solving someone else's weather is a form of trespass. I know now. The river made its case for indifference and tenderness at the same time. The messages from Natalie shrank until they were like postcards from a place I no longer visited. The occasional blast. Holidays, blame spiked with longing. The careful reconstruction of a past where I had been taken care of by someone whose definition of care involved replacing my taste with hers. Once I wrote back, "I hope you build something you love." It wasn't an olive branch. It was a sentence that made my shoulders feel less like shelves. News of her life arrived like weather reports through people who still follow multiple storms. Storage fees heavy. Selling off the closets you used to name. A sedan where a symbol stood. Consulting hours that actually added up to income that you can live on if you also learn to cook and make peace with grocery store candles. Parents' house for a while, then a small place of her own with thin walls and the discovery that neighbors cook with turmeric. "She calls you a ghost," a mutual friend texted once. "I wish she'd call me a choice," I typed and did not hit send. A wedding back in Denver brought us into the same air. She was dressed like someone who had learned nothing and everything, depending on the angle. We nodded. I congratulated the couple. She clapped at the right moments. We did not stage a confrontation or rehearse an old scene. Later, under strings of lights that made everyone look better than life usually allows, she approached. "You look," she said, and the pause was heavy with adjectives the mouth couldn't decide between: different, older, freer, smug, whole. "Well," she finished, "you look well." "You too," I lied, because one of us needed to choose gentleness and I was qualified. She turned away. I watched people dance and thought about how good it feels when the body trusts the ground. There's a version of this story that pretends the solution is endurance until someone changes. There's a version that crowns vengeance as the protagonist and calls scorched earth clean. Neither feels like the math that balances. Here's the version that became true. She made a claim. I tested it. I built a life that protected my work and my attention. I learned that competence is a better answer than anger, that autonomy is a practice, not a personality trait, that the weather changes and the right gear is mostly boundaries and decent boots. A day in this new life has the good kind of repetition. Morning, coffee, beans ground into a sound that means begin. Emails that demand precision, responses that give it without offering blood. A lab bench with its own small kingdom of tasks. Mount sensor, calibrate the lyre, argue with a voltage that refuses to be polite. A run by the water where geese mock me but don't get a vote. Sometimes the mind wanders, and now it wanders toward plans rather than threats. Afternoon, a meeting where the youngest voice solves an old problem, and I shut up so the room can recalibrate who gets to be brilliant. A design review where someone pokes a hole in my favorite idea, and I do not call it betrayal. A hallway joke that explains a hard thing better than a white paper could. Evening, the warehouse, drones rising like impatient birds. Laughter that smells like solder and sugar. Or a small dinner with one person who listens with both ears and a full heart, who doesn't need to be convinced that an algorithm can be poetry if built right. We talk about terribly specific things and laugh at terribly dumb things. The city slows down enough at night to hear the private notes in its song. Night. Sleep arrives without being negotiated like a treaty. When I wake at 3 a.m., it's because an idea tapped the window, not because anxiety set the alarms. I write it down. I go back under. Advice for someone who hears you'd crumble and feels that sickening vertigo. Test environments matter. Build one. It should include friends who carry boxes and jokes in equal measure. A professional shield if your work allows for one. A plan. What moves first, what gets stored, what absolutely has to travel with you in your carry-on because you can't afford to lose it in transit, your dignity, your patience, one photo. The flash drive with the drafts that saved your life, the habit of saying no. Expand the story with subplots that matter. A hobby that uses the body, a place where competence is valued more than optics, a room where your name on the lease corresponds to your name on the door. Standards, finally, are not bans on joy, they are invitations to real joy. My standards are simple and the opposite of hers. No more apologizing for the bench. No more choosing image over fluency. No more mistaking critique for care when the critique is about replacing my life with someone else's plan. No more performing masculinity that looks like silent endurance. The new standard is vibrancy and accountability. Who did I help today? What did I build? What did I refuse that would have cost me more than it offered? Did I laugh enough to grease the gears? There are still ghosts. Sometimes I hold a shirt and hear her voice. Sometimes I open a spreadsheet and remember the dizzying choreography of pretending to plan a future that had already been canceled on my end. Ghosts don't leave. They get bored. I don't feed them. I let them drift. If we ever speak again, and the world is long enough that we might, I'll thank her for one thing, forcing a test I should have run years ago. It's ethically inconvenient to admit gratitude to the person who tried to narrate you into a smaller role, but science is messy. The data says I am better here. The graph is pretty. The error margins narrow daily. The trajectory remains stable. No, I did not crumble. I burned clean on re-entry and shed the parts that couldn't survive heat. I landed. I checked the landing gear. I rolled back into the hangar and wrote the report. Then I hung a new sign above the bench. It reads, "Build without apology." Build without apology.